After 4 weeks of talking about big heads, minus worlds, secret screens, debug modes, and exploitable passwords, I wanted to turn the attention to the magazines that publish the cheat codes. From Electronic Gaming Monthly, to GamePro, to Die Hard Game Fan, every publication had their own unique spin on the tips and tricks section. You have to understand that this was a time before everybody had the internet. So the only way to hear about the Aladdin level skip or Street Fighter 2's bonus costumes was to get the hookup from a friend or seek out every magazine you could find. These days, you just have to go to GameFAQs or dozens of other code sites. But it wasn't that easy in the late 1980s and early 90s. I would also mention that we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways, but that goes without saying. For many Americans, Nintendo Power was the gateway drug for cheat codes. Instead of writing hard-hitting news stories and offering opinionated reviews, the magazine chose to fill up the pages with exhaustive and highly detailed strategy guides. But beyond printing the usual dungeon maps and level guides, Nintendo Power also published traditional cheat codes in a section known as Classified Information. This eventually led to a comprehensive guidebook that collected all of the NES, Super NES, and Game Boy codes printed over the years. Tricks of the Trade is what Electronic Gaming Monthly called their cheat code section, and it was a staple of the magazine for most of its run. In the early days, EGM would actually rate each code using a 5-star system. This was later abandoned, replaced by a straight cheat code section with neither bells nor whistles. This eventually led to the magazine trying to make the section more interactive, asking readers to help crack hard-to-believe codes. Of course, asking the readers for help was nothing new. GamePro would routinely give t-shirts to anybody who got their code published, which led to the plagiarism issue we talked about on yesterday's episode. On top of having a dedicated cheat code section known as SWAT, Secret Weapons and Tactics, GamePro would add little pro tips alongside the overly friendly reviews. The code section proved to be so popular that GamePro attempted to spin it off into its own magazine called SWAT Pro. Believe it or not, GamePro wasn't the only magazine to attempt this type of spin-off. Video games and computer entertainment started out with a fairly unspectacular cheat code section before giving it a full makeover and creating Tips and Tricks magazine. This not only proved to be a good business move, but actually outlasted both video games and computer entertainment and the rebranded video games magazines. While most magazines had a variation of the cheat code section, they all handled it a little differently. We saw Die Hard Game Fan invent a fun animated character in charge of providing the freshest cheat codes. Mean Machine Sega prided itself on giving user-friendly tips for European, American, and Japanese games. Raze, on the other hand, had hacks and stacks, which sounds cool, but doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And don't forget about CVG, which collected codes for both consoles and computers at a time when the two were usually segregated. You don't see these types of cheat codes listed in magazines anymore. For one thing, there aren't that many magazines still kicking around, and most people would rather turn to the internet for cheats than thumb through a bunch of Game Informer issues. It also doesn't help that many of today's biggest video games have ditched cheat codes entirely, leaving these publications with nothing to print. In an age before the internet, these magazines were a great source for level selects, sound tests, and unlimited continues. It was often the reason why gamers subscribed to Nintendo Power and GamePro, and it remained one of the most popular sections for decades. As compelling as it is to talk about classic reviews and old school rumors, you should never forget the importance of the tips and tricks section. Hey, thanks for watching the 27th episode of the 32 Dangerous Cheat Codes. We're almost done, folks. Only 5 episodes left, and we're leading up to a doozy of an ending. After that, we return to our regular schedule, which will involve looking at the best and worst games of the year and talking about some of the hidden gems. We're also going to debut a new episode of Boss Rush in the coming weeks, so you won't want to miss that. If any of this sounds appealing to you, then I recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.